What is life for? There is a universal reality which we call life principle. A life principle is a generalized, accepted intention of purpose that is applied to specific choices and circumstances. For example, always do good and avoid evil. So my principle directs me to choose that which is good and to avoid that which is evil. We are creatures of habit. Every time we think a certain way, seek a certain good, use a given motive, a habit is forming and deepening in us. So it is with life principle. With each use, it becomes a deeper and more permanent habit. And in the twilight of life, our habits rule us. And we will die as we have lived. What is the life principle of Jesus? In the temptation story, we find Jesus clarifying his own life principle. And more specifically, we find him rejecting 3 life principles suggested to him by the devil. The first temptation, for pleasure. The devil said to him, if you are God's son, order these stones to turn into bread. But Jesus answered, man does not live by bread alone. In other gospel, he also says, man live by every word that pour forth from the mouth of God. So Jesus, after his fasting, was very hungry. And the promise of the devil was the satisfaction of his immediate physical hunger. But man does not live by bread alone. There are other things in life which are much more important than the mere satisfaction of our bodily and material needs. Jesus' hunger and thirst, Jesus' pleasure is to do the will of his Father and thus give him glory. Second temptation, for power. The devil then takes Jesus up to a high place and shows him all the glittering kingdom of the world and promises him power and glory over these places and people if Jesus is willing to bow down and worship him. You will enjoy popularity, admiration, and praise from the people. Jesus firmly rejects this life principle. No way, begone Satan. We must worship God and serve him alone. Jesus did possess divine power, but he did not misuse it to serve his own ego needs for popularity, admiration, and praise, to make life easy for himself instead of following the will of the Father, which is the way of the cross. He did not misuse it to shock Santiri, but he humbled himself, took the nature of a humble servant, and washed the feet of his disciples. He chose the way of the Father, which is the way of the cross. Third temptation, avoidance of responsibility. So Satan takes Jesus up to the pinnacle of the temple and urges him to throw himself down. Don't worry. Let your Father catch you in the arms of his angels. Go ahead, jump down. After all, you are the Son of God. But Jesus will not abdicate his personal responsibility for his life. We can be tempted in this way. Well, we are not really free anyway. It means psychologically, we accept a kind of determinism that rationalizes an avoidance of responsibility. But Jesus is firm. Don't play and test God and experiment with God's patience. So in the clarification of his own life principle, Jesus is stating firmly, I will not live for pleasure. I will not live for power. I will not surrender responsibility for my life and my actions. I will live only for the glory of my Father. These same three principles rejected by Jesus have been proposed by three great psychologists as the life principle of all humans. We start with Sigmund Freud. To him, our lives and activities are always motivated by the pleasure principle, libido. So many sins are committed because of our inordinate cravings for pleasure. The pleasures of food, sex, power, and so on. Therefore, the need for fasting to mortify our inordinate cravings for pleasures. The second psychologist, ALFRED Adler, who interpreted all relationships as struggle for power, that there is this basic desire and struggle for power and accomplishment. However, he said that this could be channeled in the positive and useful accomplishment. The third one, by the name of B.F.SKIINER, he proposed that it is not pleasure, it is not the pursuit of power that writes the script for human life. But he says, we are all conditioned, all programmed. Our life story cannot change. We are predetermined. We can't exercise freedom, nor responsibility. That means, if we believe his teaching, his psychology, then logically, we can avoid responsibility for our lives and actions. Jesus rejects all the three temptations: to live for pleasure, for power, and the avoidance of responsibility. Jesus lived only for the glory of his Father. So, sisters and brothers, what is our Christian life principle? So, like Jesus, we too should also reject. But before that, we must be mindful of these three temptations because they are very subtle. Be mindful of our motivations. This self-centered motivations. So we can purify and change our motivation to let them be directed towards God. So, pleasure, okay, but let our pleasure be the pleasure in loving and serving God and neighbor, and thus glorify God. Let our power be for loving and serving God and neighbor, and thus glorify God. And let our freedom be the freedom of responsibility in the love and service of God and neighbor, and thus glorify God. That in everything we do, we shock God, bukan sendiri.